Hello, my name is William Underwood, and for my further oral assessment, I'll be asking the two questions. How could the text be read and interpreted differently by two different readers, and how and why is a social group represented in a particular way? I will use the interview the advantages and disadvantages of speaking in more than one language, and the article Feel More Fun in French, Your Personality Can Change Depending on the Language You Speak. With these two texts, I will be looking into the IB topic, language, and the individual, multilingualism, bilingualism, language, profile, and identity. Both of these texts show how speaking different languages can change a person's personality, views on the world, and personal and cultural identity. The perspective from my author in my article is that bilingual speakers have different personalities, identities, while speaking these different languages, and she gives multiple examples throughout the article on how these speakers identify themselves with their languages. Similarly, in the interview, the speaker gives his he believes he has multiple identities with his different languages, and he gives personal experiences on how being a bilingual immigrant and how he identifies with his mother tongue compared to his English. So the concept that is most emphasized is how they identify themselves with their languages. In the interview, the speaker emphasizes that bilinguals need to have an effective relationship between his languages, and he goes deep into his past where he grew up in Havana, where he learned his Spanish language and describes the connection he feels with it. And he was asked, do you feel like a different person when you speak in each language? And his response is, yes, I feel like Spanish is a language of loss and what could have been and where I was born, because he grew up in Cuba until he was 11, and he defected, so he feels sadness there. And when he speaks about English, he says English is my language of happiness. It is the language of the future, and is what I speak with my wife and my kids. For the speaker, he obviously identifies himself different in both English and Spanish because he's a much happier person in English than he is in Spanish. And in the article, there's a very similar circumstance where a Russian immigrant identifies very differently in both English and Russian. And the girl Margarita left Russia to escape anti-Semitism, and those experiences with anti-Semitism have shaped her identity with that language. And the denotation for anti-Semitism is a discrimination against Jews. So she feels she said in the article, she feels very guarded, reserved, and uncomfortable when speaking in Russian, because of all the bad experiences she had with anti-Semitism in Russia. So when asked how she feels when she speaks in English, she said she feels curious, outgoing, and free. And and so you could see how her identity is different when she's speaking in both of those languages, how she could be a happier, more free, outgoing person when she speaks in English rather than Russian. And so you can see how both of these texts emphasize how immigrants have formed new identities for themselves throughout their new language. And the concepts in both of these texts that are really played down are the disadvantages of being multilingual, because they barely talk about it because there's very few of them. And one of the main problems in multilingual households is raising the children multilingual and being fluent as they grow up, because sometimes the child wants to only identify with the language that his friends speak in school, so they can have an attempt to fit in with their friends' culture, and so they won't have to be like a social outcast. And this can cause their ability to speak multiple language growing up and practicing it in the future to not be as good if they even possess it at all. And the other issue is that when you are juggling different languages in your head in conversation, you can get different language rules mixed up. Therefore, a conversation might not flow smoothly or even make sense. And the intended audience in these texts is monolinguals, because all bilinguals and multilinguals share somewhat the same experiences on how different languages can identify them and their different experiences, and they understand these experiences of the people in the text, so it kind of changes the context of reception, because monolinguals do not have the same insight that monolinguals do, so that the two texts are kind of trying to explain to monolinguals what these experiences are and how they feel. And the speaker in the interview talks a lot of the in first person to describe his personal experiences and how multilingualism has shaped him. And the author of the article writes an expository text and writes in the third person to describe and explain other people's experiences in multilingualism and how it has shaped them. In both texts, the people getting interviewed had most authority within the text because they're telling their personal stories and how multilingualism has affected them and shaped them and how their identities are totally different in each language. So, in conclusion, both texts represent multilinguals in certain ways. So, they can identify themselves in any which way they want with these languages. And being bilingual and multilingual has a big impact on these people's everyday lives, and they have much more complexity with them when it comes to their identity, how they identify their language, and their thought process, and juggling multiple languages. So yeah, this is my presentation.